everybody, to this episode of The Monthly Blend, a monthly video podcast brought to you by Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, and the Big Idea CONNECTpreneur community. I'm Tian Wong, founder and host of the Big Idea CONNECTpreneur community, which is a global community of over 25,000 investors, founders, and business leaders from around the world. I'm also CEO of Opus 8, which invests in fintech, health tech, and marketing technology companies through our Phoenix Fund. And we also help companies and alternative investment managers raise money through our network of over 3,000 accredited private investors, angels, and family offices throughout the US. Along with my co-host, Anthony Millen, who is the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, we are pleased to bring you this monthly video podcast, which will cover trends, information, and interesting research and tidbits, as well as fascinating interviews with game changers and newsmakers here in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore Metroplex. Anthony and I started this podcast a little over a year ago as a way to increase awareness, break down silos, and as a mechanism to do our part in helping to bring this region together and to foster innovation and entrepreneurship here. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to have a conversation with an amazing person, entrepreneur, investor, and game changer, Melissa Bradley. When I first met Melissa about 15, 16 years ago, I was told by the person who introduced us to, quote, fasten my seatbelts. And you guys will see why very soon. But Melissa is a terrific contributor. She is an amazing national leader on a number of different initiatives. She is the co-founder of Eureka, managing partner of 1863 Ventures, and she's involved with a whole host of different business and entrepreneurship and investment activities. And Melissa, I would love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself a little more fully. And we are so thrilled to have you today. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I was like, wow, have we really known each other that long? But it has been that long.
Time flies.
And particularly when you're having fun, when you're making trouble or having fun, it always flies. So I'm honored to be here. So I think you covered a lot of things. I think three things I would say. One, I'm a serial entrepreneur investor because I find no other way to just bring ultimate enjoyment and pleasure. I'm mindful that people say working for yourself is the hardest thing ever, but to me, it's the most fun. The second thing is I'm a parent. So I'm married and I'm a parent of 6 kids. And so very, very proud of that. And I would say that all the things that you mentioned, I do have a lot of roles, but I say I have many roles and one goal. And that one goal is to really democratize access to entrepreneurship. I know when I was growing up as a kid, people would talk about it, but there was no one in my world or my universe that had ever run a business that I was aware of. I have later learned that my great-grandfather was one of the first Black restaurant owners in Harlem. But I was like, wow, how that would have changed my life if somebody had that dinner table conversation with me. So all of those things I do, it's really just to make sure everybody has the ultimate opportunity to become an entrepreneur and or an investor.
That's terrific. Well, we're going to start the segment by having Anthony, our co-host, come through with a couple questions for you, and then I'll have a few questions and we'll go from there. But I'd like to introduce my co-host for the Monthly Blend, Anthony Millen, who is also a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor. He is a partner in a national venture capital fund, and he's also one of the top startup attorneys in the country. He is the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, which is basically disrupting the way legal services are delivered to early stage companies and entrepreneurs. And I'd like to also congratulate Anthony and his team as they were named the Startup Law Firm of the Year by Legal Week, which is a national publication in the legal industry. So Anthony, congratulations on that, and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Tian. And thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today. In terms of where we'd like to start today's discussion, as you mentioned and Tian mentioned, you have a number of different entities and funds that you work with. And we would really be interested to hear how your various entities and funds work with startup and emerging growth companies in the DMV.
Yeah, no, happy to. So let me just say my loyalty to the DMV since I've been here since 1985 runs deep. And it's been amazing to see how far we've come in the world of entrepreneurship just in this region. So at 1863, we invest in what we call new majority entrepreneurs, so entrepreneurs of color all across the country. However, we have been privileged to receive a grant from the District of Columbia government, namely DEMPED. So we are administering the DC Investment Fund. So I've had the privilege to get to know Tian in many ways, but one was working at CIT. And so we know in the DMV, there's always been CIT investing in Virginians, and we know there's always been TEDCO investing in Marylanders, but we've never had that presence in the district. So we are humbled and pleased to be able to offer that. And so that investment fund is now up and running and going through our process of making investments in entrepreneurs in DC. We're also, through 863, in partnership with Capital One, providing grants to businesses that have been impacted by COVID. So it's called the 3 Rs: recover, rebuild, and resilience. So if anybody, doesn't matter, been impacted by COVID, whether you're running a business or you in corporate America and you were impacted, we encourage you to fill out the application, and you get 3 things. You get access to training and workshops to really help de-risk and grow your business. You get access to a $5,000 grant. We are very clear, it doesn't cover everything, but it's a start. And more importantly, you get access to a dedicated coach who's going to help you take your kind of revised business plan through that. So really excited about that. As Tian mentioned, I sit on several boards and advisory committees, so honored to be on the Halcyon Fund Committee and to have been an early reviewer for that process. So thrilled at the progress they've made. Also NextGen, which is local, serve as an investment advisor there. And so always happy to make introductions to companies and often sit in on some of those diligence calls. And then for Eureka, we are a national platform designed to help small businesses scale. And so it is one of the challenges I learned in the accelerator business is we're good at one-to-many, but not always one-to-one. So if there's any entrepreneur out there who's not part of a program, who's already graduated, or just want some dedicated advice, then we highly encourage folks to come to Eureka, and I'm happy to provide a free 90-day trial to folks who are listening and watching so that they can sign up and give it a shot, where you get access to content and coaching and an amazing community of over 15,000 entrepreneurs. And the last thing I would say is I have the privilege, Tian and I hang out university circuit a bit. I have the privilege to be a professor at Georgetown. This is my almost 9th year. Going in, and I teach MBA students, but I'm still very connected to the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Program for undergrads and across the campus. I am a Hoya. I am a proud alum, and I'm actually traveling with them to our event in Nashville, where I'm going to be a judge at the pitch competition. So happy to always help, as always, any fellow Hoya.
It is amazing. I've been in this region now little over a decade. And so, when you talk about some of the evolution and growth of the startup ecosystem here, it's really been amazing to see how it's evolving and all of the different touch points that you have in facilitating and helping lead some of these areas of growth that are happening. In terms of where you specifically with 1863 Ventures and some of the other groups, what are your main focus areas in terms of industries or stage, or above and beyond being in the district? What are some of the other kind of areas of focus for you?
Yeah, so we help any entrepreneur that I would say, and I'll be honest, because having worked out in Silicon Valley, I struggle, but I would say pre-seed, seed, and a East Coast Series A, because I think they're very different out the West Coast. So we help any entrepreneur as long as they're up and running. But one of the things we're mindful of is that there's 88 to almost 90% of all the programs in this country focus on startups. Where we saw a gap was really on those businesses trying to grow and scale. So to come into the accelerator program, you have to have a minimum 100,000 ARR. To be considered for investment, you have to have a minimum of 300,000 ARR. We are sector agnostic. We do that because we recognize that if we just use Black founders as a proxy, less than 20% of them are in tech. There's a lot of programs growing, but we'll look at tech companies. 50% of our portfolio is tech. And then we have CPG, beauty, health. We have food and beverage as a growing industry. We also are working with some cannabis companies and some spirits companies. So we're happy to talk to any entrepreneur who is passionate about what they do, as long as they have some evidence of traction and we think we can be helpful.
In terms of where you're talking about where you like to step in, so in kind of that scaling phase, what are some of the things that you do that kind of really distinguish or differentiate you from the marketplace? Because it is one of the hardest phases for companies to get through, is that kind of early scaling phase. So how do you tackle that, and how is that different from some of the other programs that are out there?
We're only 6 years old. So, I think both of you can attest to this. I think oftentimes we find ourselves doing things that we don't have time for, but we're passionate about. So when I started, I did not need another job. And I wasn't looking for something new to do. But I think when I did an event actually with Georgetown students east of the river and realized the need that existed in DC and then quickly across the country, I took time to do a competitive analysis. I'll even say comparative, because I don't know that we're actually all competing. And I think what we found were a couple of things. One is that, again, there was an over-indexing on startups. And so we felt like there was a real opportunity for those where most folks get lost in the valley of death after their friends and family and angel trying to get to an institution. We wanted to really focus there. We also realized that while there were a lot of programs, not a lot of them were run by entrepreneurs. And so I'm proud to say when we started, every single person on our team was an entrepreneur. 3 of us had exit. Some of us had been investors. And that's not to say anybody can't help, but I remember going to the SBA and having a corporate executive tell my business would never be successful. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not really what I thought the SBA was supposed to do. And luckily later we actually had an exit, but I realized her risk tolerance and aperture around understanding risk was not the same as mine. I was willing to risk it all. I leveraged insurance policies. I took my 401k, I took everything. I realized she would never do that. And so her belief that the business was going to be successful, she could only operate within the world that was comfortable to her. So I think we are dedicated to making sure that we're building a community of entrepreneurs who can talk to each other, who are a little bit ahead, and just be able to share that journey of like, yep, some days I want to quit. Oh my God, I got the last dollar out of my 401k. Help me understand how I'm going to make it work. Or, hey, can you connect me to somebody? So I would say we're very much entrepreneur focused. And then the final thing I would say again is that we don't focus on just fundraising. And so a lot of the programs that we've looked at, and this is no disrespect, they really focus on pitching and how do you get that right and how do you do your day. We don't talk about that at all. We are really trying to move people from founders to CEOs. So we talk about marketing, we talk about sales and strategy, we talk about hiring, we talk about culture, we talk about finances and fundraising, but in the context of what is the right trajectory of your business and when do you fundraise? Because I do worry that a lot of people are over fundraising and having too much money that they just cannot deploy fast enough with all these new funds. So those are 3 differences that we have spent time looking at. We update that every other year by calling some of our peers in the market. And then I think the entrepreneurs have somewhat validated. And I should say this, I want to really refine that we really don't believe in competition. We find that, particularly the DMV, most entrepreneurs are going to at least 3 different programs, if not more. And so I respect that somebody's going to come out of university or go to a university program, and they may come to us and they may go to 2 other programs after us, and that's okay. Because entrepreneurship is hard. And I think there's those where you need general business experience, where you need sector experience, where you need to raise money, where you need to build your social capital. And so I'm just really pleased because I started my first business here and there was nothing. So I'm just thrilled that there's actually an ecosystem for us to have versus the same 2 people who are like, is this really a good idea? Because I'm swamped with other people calling me. So I just am really happy that we've evolved, to tell you the truth.
And it definitely fills this really critical part of the life cycle, like you said, after companies have raised that pre-seed funding or friends and family and have to start executing on that. So that's great. One of the other things I was interested to know a little about is you brought up COVID and some of the services that you have done. In terms of how COVID has kind of impacted the businesses that your businesses and businesses that you're working with, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen as a result of COVID? And, which of those do you think are kind of probably permanent changes to the way things are going to be done going forward?
So I'm happy to say that of all of our businesses, which are well over 3,000, we had a 95% survival rate of our businesses post-COVID. And it was because they said we taught them how to save and manage cash flow, period. And so I think a lot of folks who were riding the wave of keep fundraising to subsidize activity are realizing I need to hurry up and make revenue. And hopefully that continues. I think that you can be venture backed and actually focus on revenue at the same time. I think that's one. I think 2, particularly for our product-based businesses, really reimagining your supply chain. And obviously having to reimagine pricing and cost. It is no longer sufficient. Let me go find the cheapest no matter where it is, but really be mindful of how do I, restaurants are doing it at farm to table. How do I really have a regional ecosystem that can support my business now that I have seen the impacts of global shocks? And particularly because we work mostly with entrepreneurs of color, the joke is when the formerly majority community sneezes, the Black and brown community actually gets the flu. And so I think it was a chance, particularly for founders of color and women, to really kind of level the playing field and say, look, I've been doing things differently because I didn't have that much money. I've already got my local people. I'm already running a lean shop. And I think you've seen their survivability. So I think the third thing is really being more disciplined around spending and having managed growth as opposed to just reckless growth where you're just driving in different directions. I think instead of saying, I'm going to do 20 things, I'm going to try to do 3 to 5 things really well. The other thing I would say is that, we have a lot more money available, right? I mean, just amongst my friends who are Black GPs, there was $300 billion given in 2020. So I think, and some of them are exclusively investing in entrepreneurs of color, and some of them are investing everybody. And so I would say that, the other thing to be excited about is the amount of money and the number of new funds that have spun up that are great. And I think particularly for tech, but mostly non-tech businesses, the corporate commitments that came out of COVID, but more importantly, George Floyd, and the fact that many of them are beginning to think differently about supplier diversity or supply chain. And again, thinking about how do I start to do more in this country and how do I do more with smaller businesses to help lift the economy and preserve jobs. I think every entrepreneur, no matter race, creed, color, gender, is benefiting from some of those market shifts that we've seen since COVID.
And so as you look at those types of changes, and those are all really positive changes, and you kind of look at where your vision for the different investment and entrepreneur support roles that you have, what is kind of your next couple of years look like for your own vision for where you'd like to see things go?
Yeah, I think when you look at the statistics, again, across the board of race, gender, and where people are and ethnicity, geography and ethnicity, we saw 4 million new businesses started. So I think what's exciting to me is that there are many more entrepreneurs for us to invest in and to help. We kind of got out of our 12 or 15 year slump, whatever it was, and we've seen new businesses just pop up all over the place. And so that's exciting. Statistically, we've also seen that many of them are women or people of color, which is perfect because that's who we help. And so I'm excited that, we'll be thinking about more ways to invest in these entrepreneurs and probably spinning up another fund or two. We will be refining our accelerator program to really be laser focused on how do you get these companies to a J curve within 12 to 18 months and to kind of decrease that typical startup cycle due to lack of access to both financial and social capital. And I think the other piece too, which I'll say I see from professor lens, is a lot more women coming into this. I teach finance-oriented and non-finance oriented courses, and I'm always frustrated personally as a finance major that women tend to not be in those spaces. But I think some of the spaces where I'm seeing women CFOs and women executives really come into the forefront, really excited about that. And coming into industries that are not the typical ones of health, beauty, wellness, but coming into fintech, coming into biotech and really some of the hard sciences, that is probably really exciting to me.
Well, we're very excited to watch and see how all of this continues to develop and grow. I am going to now hand it back to Tian for the next segment of the show.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. So, Melissa, you're a national player. I know you're from New York and you've came here as an undergrad, but you've also worked in New York. You've worked in, obviously, Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. And part of our objective here with the monthly blend is to sort of take an assessment of our community here and see some of the things that we're doing right, some of the things we could be doing better, and try to help steer the conversation towards some cognizance about what people that are listening in can do to help us grow this ecosystem. So how would you assess the current state of the DMV startup ecosystem? What do you think are some of the things we can do to improve it? And where do you see this particular market headed over the next 10 years?
Yeah. So one, I think, how far we've come, right? The fact that Washington, D.C., I'm talking region, but like what is even on the global entrepreneurship monitor? Like that's just a coup in and of itself that like we're in the top 10. I think we're like 5 or 6. So, but I think that's important because I think Virginia and Maryland have always outpaced the district, and it's been complicated for entrepreneurs to say, I want to be here, because it was either I pick Virginia, I pick Maryland, and then DC is kind of just GovTown. And what do I do? And so I do think it's helpful that we actually now have a tri-state-ish region that entrepreneurs can feel comfortable in and really move seamlessly. So I think one of DC kind of picking it up and meeting the other 2 areas has been helpful. And then I think some of the private sector things around the Greater Washington Economic Partnership and others really thinking about Baltimore and extending that region. I think that's helpful. I think there's been a lot of collaboration amongst universities. And so that's been great of being intentional. And then I would even say the economic development agencies, during DC Startup Week, You had Victor on talking about, yeah, I'm based in Virginia, but any entrepreneur is welcome. So I think some of those false barriers of like, don't go across the bridge or don't go uptown are gone. And we all recognize the fluidity of the region and that we need to stop in our silos, but really figure out how do we support the entrepreneur's journey. So I'm optimistic that we have finally achieved a level of, I'd say, comparability, not competitiveness, with the Silicon Valleys or the New Yorks, where you think about those kind of tri-state areas and the mobility that exists for entrepreneurs to move smoothly with less friction. I think we're finally there.
Yeah, it's been great to see the progress in the region for sure. And I think also we are blessed in a way that we are sort of a leader in DE&I, right? I mean, we have great diversity of backgrounds and economic standing and ethnicities and whatnot. How does that play into the great work that you guys are doing? Or,
I think part of that is based on what has been the historical composition of the area, right? I mean, I think DC has historically been a Black city. We're probably now more cafe con leche, but there's still a deep presence. And what I would say is better, an integration. It used to be once you cross that bridge, there was no diversity whatsoever. And so I think you've seen an increase of services, an increase of diversity, housing prices increase. And I throw in housing prices because no entrepreneur can be successful if its underlying micro or macroeconomic state is not well supported. So I think all boats in the regions are finally lifted. And I think that's a wonderful thing, regardless. And then I think, again, post George Floyd, we have always been intentional about thinking about east of the river or Ward 7 and 8 initiatives from a university perspective to even how economic development has done that. So it's not surprising that we remain a leader in that space. And I think, I live in DC, so there's pros and cons of us being with the kind of federal city. But I think the federal city has changed, right? I think there's been momentum of thinking. I mean, if you think about the SBA now and thinking about how do they support underrepresented founders, however they define that, I think the political focus on greater diversity beyond the solo or small team white guys in Silicon Valley at a federal level and thinking of how do we democratize, I think it's awesome. And let's be honest, I want to give credit where credit is due. With folks like Steve Case and Rise of the Rest and saying, hey, you got to move from just these two little spaces. I think we've benefited from that because he was here, he sat here, he raised the flag and just got people to think differently. And then I think there's been lots of organizations, many of which we're all familiar with, that have kind of stepped up and said, how do we leverage not being those coasts to become our competitive advantage? And I think diversity around race and gender is one, diversity around types of business is another. We're no longer just the gov contracting business. I think that's been huge.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. A lot of the groups you mentioned earlier are also trying to attract companies and entrepreneurship and capital to this region. What are your thoughts on what our region needs to do to continue to grow our leadership position where we're leading and to attract companies and perhaps more importantly, attract young talent and capital? Do you have thoughts on strategies and resources that are needed?
I mean, we think about it because our entrepreneurs are truly struggling when we start to look at their, investments and their financials. I'm going, whoa, look at those variable costs of a bunch of 1099 people. Where are the full-time folks? And we can't find them. So we're definitely seeing in our portfolio companies. Yeah, I think one, we definitely need more investors here. I think we've increased the number of investors who are present here, but not necessarily investing here with the same proportionality of their investing other places. So I think one, there needs to be a call for investment firms that are here, not so much to allocate. I don't believe in set asides and quotas, but to just be more mindful of, we have emerging talent. How can they start to invest more in their backyard? Because it's cheaper and easier for them. I think on the talent side, I know that, the partnership and federal council, all those are thinking about things of how do we probably improve, not just talent, but tech talent. It is extremely frustrating to me, again, being at Georgetown, looking at the universities, we're not maximizing. You've got University of Maryland, you've got, Hopkins, you've got some amazing places where I don't think we've done a really good job of getting that talent to stay here. Some of that has been the very high cost of living, which is not we haven't scaled as much as everybody else, but I think we've got to do a better job of getting some of these graduates, students who graduate, to stay here. And so we've got to start thinking about compensation. We've got to start thinking about housing prices. We've got to start thinking about what does their work-life balance, because what I hear from all of my students is it's not just about the job. So I think we've got to catch up with these folks and really figure out how do we create a fertile ground for them to be successful here.
Yeah, no, you talked about capital, and what's your prognosis for the future of these micro funds that are coming out to do niche investing, investing in women, investing in Black founders?
Yeah.
Do you think this is a trend that's going to continue? Is it a fad? How do we sustain this?
So I wasn't sure, to be honest, but I just checked in with several folks. We had an informal call. I think I want to say it's more than a fad, right? I mean, I think any investment vehicle will last as long as it's successful. I would say what it's done more of that I think people didn't think about is it's been great to help the entrepreneurs, don't get me wrong. But what it's done more of is almost serve like a scout for some of these more traditional Series A, where we're taking the early risk, we're de-risking these companies, we're riding along. We have an operations partner who literally rolls up her sleeves and talks to these companies every 2 weeks. That we're saving them money. We're saving follow-on funds time. We're really helping them advance their NAV and their performance. And so I think whether they believe in our investment thesis or not, we have somewhat ratcheted up from just the generic top of funnel, send me an email, to like, oh, okay, I now have a cadre of fund managers that have spent time, at least a year or two, with these entrepreneurs. Who can they pass on to me? And as we begin to see these normal funds now become mega funds of, billions of dollars, I think people are going to care. We've had, I won't name them, but some pretty large private equity funds saying, look, we know your companies are nowhere ready for us, but we operate in a 3 to 5 year timeline. If you see anybody on the trajectory, send them to us. And I'm like, wow, I would have never thought you would have looked at us. So I think they're viewing us as a scouting agency. And as long as there's a rationale for us to be in business and we do our job, I'd like to believe that we're slightly more than a fad.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And, we have seen now through research that diversity in the boardroom is good for business. It's good for shareholders. Diversity in the executive suite, in the management levels is a good thing. It's not just, the right thing to do. When do you think we're going to have research that proves that the kind of work that you guys are doing is actually creating alpha for these investors?
It's going to take a minute. I do leverage my Georgetown hat to do research. And so 2.5 years ago, we did a study that showed it costs at least $250,000 more for an entrepreneur of color to start the same exact business as a white peer. And it's because of direct and indirect costs that they bear. We're in the midst of finishing up all the data and focus groups for something called Beyond 5, because we begin, the national stat that half of businesses fail within 5 years. We weren't seeing that. We were seeing companies that had been around 5, 7, 9, 10 years. But they weren't necessarily growing. And so we now have data that says that Black and brown entrepreneurs tend to last 8.7 years in length at minimum. The challenge is their sustainability does not correlate to increased investment or increased revenue because nobody's paying attention for them. I would say I'm only able to do that because I'm a researcher independent at a university. We have been petitioning PitchBook and so many other places say, could you please collect race data? I'm not going to hold it against you, I promise. And so I do think until we take out the potential of penalty for people to collect and report on data, not just by gender and zip code, but by race and other factors, it's going to be hard. We have a very informal partnership with Stripe and PayPal, and we've said, look, we know you have the data, even if you just do some geo fencing around zip code. Same thing. We have conversations out the wazoo with MasterCard, but we have not created a safe space for us to have these honest conversations. So I think first we've got to create a safe space for people to be able to share that data and not be worried that somebody's going to attack them and say, well, why aren't you doing more? Because I don't think we have a great set of data to talk about some of these nuances that could unlock more money or improve some of the programs designed to help these historically underrepresented entrepreneurs so they actually could perform better.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see the information, and thank you for the work you're doing around the research piece. And we have viewers from around the country, not just in the DMV, and you have such a huge portfolio of stuff that you guys are doing. You said you're doing research, you have a podcast that you're going to be launching, and I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff, but what can our viewers do to help you in your work? How can they get in touch with you? Do you have any key objectives for the next year or two that they can assist with?
Yeah, I mean, so we just are on the verge of our quarterly check-in for our OKR. So I think people can email me at Melissa, MELISSA at 181863ventures.net. My kids have taught me how to accept DMs, so they can hit me up at BRADLEYML. The podcast is Founder Hustle. And obviously they can always go to our website. I think, what we welcome is anyone who has an interest to ever talk to an entrepreneur. We have a very robust community of several thousand entrepreneurs that we convene on a quarterly basis, and we want people to tell their stories, good, bad, and different. We want them to understand the honest journey. I think we have we have 14 companies in our portfolio, so we're always looking for folks who want to invest. And then if people just have questions around, like, what does it take to be able to support historically marginalized entrepreneurs, always happy to help.
That's fantastic. And, thank you so much for what you're doing for the entrepreneurs, for the investors, for the underserved communities. You've been a pioneer since I've met you. And, it's just great to see all the great work that you're doing, and we're seeing results now. So congratulations on all that stuff. We're so thrilled to have had you on the show today. And with that, let me turn it back over to Anthony.
Great. Thank you. Well, Melissa, we want to really thank you again for joining us today and for everything that you do for the DMV and our startup ecosystem through your roles at Eureka and 1863 Ventures and your role at Georgetown. There's so many different ways you're so positively impacting our ecosystem, and we thank you for that, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.